I never should have taken that house. I realize that now. But at the time, it seemed like a miracle, an old rental at a ridiculously cheap price, available on short notice. Too good to be true. And like every too good to be true story, there was a reason for it. I just didn't find out until it was too late. I moved in on a warm evening in early fall. The air was thick with the scent of dried leaves and distant rain. The house was nothing special, a one-story 1960s ranch on the edge of town, tucked between two empty lots. It had been vacant for years, the landlord told me. People don't stick around long, he had said, jingling his keys in that way realtors do when they're trying to rush a conversation. But it's a great deal. You won't find anything cheaper in the area. I didn't ask why people left. I should have. The first thing I noticed when I stepped inside was the silence. Not the peaceful kind of quiet you get in the countryside, but something else, something unnatural. Even with the windows open, there was no sound of crickets, no rustling of wind through trees. Just a heavy, pressing stillness, like the house was waiting for something. It made me uneasy, but I pushed the feeling aside. It was just a house, nothing more. By the time I finished unpacking, night had settled in. I made a half-hearted attempt to explore, flipping on light switches, checking the locks, getting a feel for the space. There is nothing remarkable about it, just an old, slightly run-down house with yellowed wallpaper and a faint smell of dust. Then I found the note. It was in the kitchen, taped to the inside of a cupboard door. The paper was brittle and curled at the edges, the ink faded but legible. Do not open the windows at night. Do not answer if you hear humming. Do not let it in. My stomach twisted. Was this a joke? A leftover Halloween prank? The handwriting was small, hurried, almost desperate. I stared at it for a long time before shaking my head and tearing it down. Someone was messing with me. Maybe the last tenant had a weird sense of humor. I crumpled the paper and tossed it in the trash, refusing to let it get under my skin. It was just a house. Just a house. I went to bed around midnight. I was exhausted, but sleep didn't come easy. The mattress was stiff, the air too still. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt, watched. Then I heard it. A soft humming. My breath hitched. It was distant at first, barely audible over the sound of my own breathing. A slow, mournful tune drifting through the walls. I sat up, every muscle in my body tensed. The sound was coming from outside. I slipped out of bed, heart pounding, and moved toward the window. The glass was dark, reflecting only my pale, sleep-deprived face. Slowly, carefully, I pulled the curtain back. Nothing. The backyard was empty. Just overgrown weeds and a rusted garden swaying slightly in the breeze. I stood there for a moment, listening, trying to convince myself I had imagined it. Then, just as I turned away, the humming stopped. I don't know why, but that scared me more than the sound itself. I locked the window. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I tried to put the whole thing out of my mind. It was just my imagination, just the unfamiliar sounds of a new house. But deep down, I knew better. I spent the day running errands, anything to keep myself out of that house for as long as possible. But eventually, as the sun began to set, I had no choice but to return. The house felt different. I couldn't explain it. The air was heavier, the silence more pronounced. I turned on every light, every TV, every noise-making thing I could find. Anything to keep the quiet at bay. By the time midnight rolled around, I was curled up on the couch, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, waiting for exhaustion to win. I told myself I wouldn't listen for it, that I wouldn't even acknowledge it if it happened again. But then the humming started, and this time it was inside the house. I went rigid. The air in my lungs turned cold. The sound was faint, almost delicate, floating down the hallway toward me. A soft, familiar tune, one I almost recognized but couldn't quite place. I forced myself to move, gripping my phone like a lifeline. The hallway was dark, a long stretch of shadow leading toward the bedrooms. I took a step forward, then another. The humming continued. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. Slowly, I raised my phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it down the hall. Nothing. Empty space. Then why did the sound feel so close? I swallowed, my throat dry. I had two choices. I could run, get in my car and drive, never look back, or I could prove to myself that nothing was there. I chose the second option. I took another step, and then something hummed right behind me. A slow, rasping exhale just inches from my ear. I spun around, phone shaking in my grip. No one was there. I ran. I didn't stop until I was in my bedroom, slamming the door shut and locking it. My breathing was ragged, my skin clammy with cold sweat. I pressed my back against the door, ears straining. Silence. Had I imagined it? Had exhaustion played tricks on my mind? Then, just as I let my guard down, a whisper came from the other side of the door. "Let me in." I don't know how long I stood there, my back pressed against the door, my heart thudding so hard it hurt. The whisper, soft, almost playful, still lingered in the air. "Let me in." I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to wake up. It had to be a dream. Sleep paralysis. Something. But then the door handle rattled. Not a violent shake. Just a small, slow testing, like fingers curling around the knob, twisting it gently. I cover my mouth to keep from screaming. The humming started again, low and melodic, right on the other side of the wood. My body refused to move, my limbs locked in place. I was trapped between the overwhelming urge to bolt and the paralyzing knowledge that whatever was outside was real. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The silence stretched on. The air felt thick, charged with something I couldn't name. I strained my ears, listening, nothing. No footsteps retreating, no whisper, no humming. I don't know how long I stood there, waiting for something else to happen. When I finally gathered the courage to reach for the door, my hand shook so badly I almost couldn't grip the lock. I hesitated. What if it was still there? I leaned in, ear against the wood, holding my breath. Silence. I turned the lock and pulled the door open just a crack. The hallway was empty. A shuddering breath escaped me, relief hitting like a punch to the gut. My whole body ached from the tension. I flicked on the light, my heart still hammering. There was nothing. No signs of someone being there. No footprints on the dusty floor. No shadows in the corners. Nothing. But then I noticed my bedroom window. It was open. I knew I had locked it. I never opened my windows at night. Not after finding that note. But there it was, wide open, letting in the damp chill of the night air. I stepped closer, pulse pounding, and peered outside. The backyard stretched into darkness, the weeds swaying slightly in the breeze. Nothing. But I wasn't reassured, because just outside the window, on the wooden sill, there were fingerprints. Long, smudged streaks of dirt, like someone had pressed their hands against the glass from the outside before slipping it open. A wave of nausea rolled through me. I didn't sleep that night. I tried to leave the next morning. I packed a bag, grabbed my keys, and practically ran to my car. But the engine wouldn't start. I turned the key again. Nothing. Not even a click. I popped the hood, but I didn't know what the hell I was looking at. The battery cables were in place. Nothing seemed off. But still dead. I took out my phone. No signal. I had full bars the day before. A cold dread crept into my stomach. It was as if something didn't want me to leave. I spent the day in town. I didn't tell anyone what happened. How could I? Hey, I think my house is haunted, and something hummed to me last night. No one would believe me. I stopped by a diner and used their Wi-Fi to look up the address. There was nothing about the house online. No crime reports, no urban legends, nothing. Just an old rental no one stayed in for long. But then I found something. A Reddit post. A 2-year-old thread in a paranormal forum. Does anyone know about the house on Sycamore Street? I stayed there for a month. Strange things happened. At night, I kept hearing a woman humming. I thought it was a neighbor, but there was no one around. Then the whispering started. I left before I could find out what she wanted. The post had only a few replies. Most people dismissed it as a prank. But one comment caught my attention. You should have never listened. Once you hear the humming, she knows you're there. And she won't stop until you let her in. My stomach twisted. I almost didn't go back. I considered sleeping in my car, getting a motel, anything. But something told me it wouldn't matter. If I had heard the humming, if she had noticed me, then I was already in too deep. I triple-checked the locks, blocked the windows, left every light on. I tried to drown out the silence with TV noise, but I couldn't relax. And then, around 2 a.m., a creak, a slow, dragging footstep inside the house. I froze. The floor groaned again, just beyond the hallway. My breath turned shallow. Then the humming started. It was closer this time, right outside my bedroom door. I gripped the blanket in white-knuckled fists, my mind racing. If I stayed quiet, maybe knock. Knock. The sound was soft, almost gentle. I squeezed my eyes shut. Let me in. The voice was clearer this time. Not a whisper, something more human, but wrong. I didn't answer. The humming continued. The knob twisted. The door pushed inward slightly, the frame groaning under pressure. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to move. Then just as suddenly it stopped. Silence. I forced myself to breathe. My whole body trembled as I reached for my phone. I turned on the screen. A new notification. My stomach dropped. There was a photo in my camera roll. A picture I didn't take. It was my bedroom door. From a hallway. And just barely visible in the darkness, standing inches from the door, a figure. A woman. And she was smiling. I stared at the image on my phone, eyes wide, pulse racing. The photo was blurry, but unmistakable. The figure just outside my door. It was a woman, dressed in old-fashioned clothing, her face half hidden in shadow. But I could make out the smile. That horrific, too wide smile. The kind of smile that looked like it belonged on a broken porcelain doll. I pulled the blanket up to my chin, my fingers trembling as I tried to rationalize what I was seeing. It had to be a trick of the light, or maybe a glitch in my phone's camera. I hadn't taken that photo. It was impossible. I checked the time. 3:02 a.m. The humming started again, quiet at first, like a lullaby carried on a breeze. It wasn't in my head. I could hear it clearly now, right outside my bedroom door, just like before. The soft, haunting melody. Each note felt like it was pulling me deeper into a dream, or maybe a nightmare. I couldn't tell the difference anymore. My throat went dry. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't move. The woman, the figure in the photo, she was real. The humming grew louder, the notes swelling, and then knock. Knock. The door shuddered, the hollow sound reverberating in my skull. I was frozen. "Let me in." The voice was clearer this time, almost pleading, but it was too late for pleading. I wasn't going to open the door. I knew better, but somehow it didn't matter. The handle rattled again. This time it wasn't gentle. It twisted with force, as if something on the other side was insisting I open the door. And I almost did. I almost reached for the handle, but I pulled my hand away at the last second. The humming stopped. Dead silence. I waited, listening. My heart thudded in my ears. Nothing. I checked my phone again, trying to distract myself from the overwhelming fear settling into my bones. Another new notification. The same photo. And this time there was something new. The woman's face was clearer. Not just a shadowed figure anymore. Her eyes were wide open, and her smile, it had stretched wider, almost grotesque. She was staring directly at the camera. Directly at me. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. I dropped the phone. I couldn't breathe. The air in the room felt suffocating, thick with something that wasn't just fear, but a presence. A weight pressing down on me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I swore I could feel her right behind me. I spun around. Nothing. But the door was open a crack. I could see the hallway through the sliver of space. And standing at the end of the hall, just inside the shadows, was the woman. She was watching me. I couldn't make out her features, but I could feel her gaze, cold and sharp, like a knife pressed to my skin. "Let me in." I heard it again, but it wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a command, a desperate demand. I staggered backward, knocking the lamp off my nightstand in the process. It crashed to the floor, casting a brief, flickering light over the hallway. For a brief moment, I thought I saw her move. A quick, jerky motion, and then silence. The lamp flickered and went out. The darkness in the hallway seemed to grow deeper, thicker, like it was swallowing the light. I didn't dare move. I stayed still, frozen in place, staring at the empty hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. Then came the sound I hadn't expected. A giggle, soft and childlike, but twisted. A sound that shouldn't have belonged to an adult woman, let alone something standing in my hallway. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone and bolted out of bed, running down the hallway toward the stairs. My feet barely touched the ground as I descended into the living room. I slammed the front door shut behind me. The locks. I double-checked them, triple-checked. I didn't know what was going on. How had she gotten in? Had she been here all along? The front door was locked when I came in earlier. The windows, too. I had checked them. I ran into the kitchen and grabbed a knife from the drawer, clutching it tightly in my hands, my fingers slick with sweat. The humming started again, faint but unmistakable. It was coming from upstairs. I slammed my hand against the wall. I wasn't going back up there. Not after what I'd seen. The photo on my phone, the way she had smiled, how she was standing there in the hallway, waiting. I didn't care if it was a hallucination or something worse. There was no way I was stepping foot in that room again. But then my phone buzzed. Another notification. I didn't want to look. I couldn't. But somehow I did. It wasn't a photo this time. It was a message. I'm still here. The blood drained from my face. I looked at the time on my phone. 3:15 a.m. The same time as before. The same time as the first night. I looked up, scanning the room. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. Every corner seemed darker than before. Suddenly, I heard a soft knock from upstairs. I didn't have to look. I knew. She was here. and she wasn't leaving. I stood frozen in the living room, gripping the knife so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The room was suffocatingly still. The humming, now louder, clearer, like the sound of a lullaby sung by a voice not meant for this world, filled the space around me. But it was different now. The melody had changed. It wasn't just a soft, eerie tune anymore. It had a rhythm, a pattern that felt deliberate, like someone was intentionally trying to lead me somewhere. It felt wrong. It was as if the song itself was a trap, and I was being drawn deeper into something I couldn't escape. I couldn't shake the image of her face. Her eyes, those wide, hollow eyes staring at me from the end of the hallway. The way her smile stretched unnaturally, splitting her face in a grotesque parody of joy. Every time I closed my eyes, it was all I could see. The memories burned into my mind like an imprint I couldn't erase. I couldn't breathe. The humming was closer now. It was as though she was right beside me. I dare not look back at the staircase, the source of the sound. The room felt smaller. The walls seemed to close in on me. I needed to leave. I needed to escape. But every time I tried to move, I found myself rooted in place. My legs wouldn't cooperate. The overwhelming sense of dread held me captive. I felt like I was sinking, falling into an abyss of my own making. Then came the voice. I'm still here. The message from my phone, the same message as before, flashed across my screen again. But this time, it wasn't just words. It was a sound, a whisper, barely audible, coming from the phone itself, from the speakers. I nearly dropped it in shock. I forced my legs to move, stumbling backward toward the front door. But as I reached for the knob, I realized with growing terror that it had locked itself again. Impossible. I yanked at the door, but it didn't budge. The locks were as solid as before, but something was different. It was like there was something holding the door closed from the outside, keeping me inside. My heart pounded in my chest, panic rising like bile in my throat. I turned, glancing frantically around the room. The windows were shut tight, the curtains drawn. There was no escape. I turned back toward the staircase, feeling my stomach twist in knots. The humming was louder now, and the soft knock came again. This time, it wasn't from the hallway. It was from directly above me. The sound of knuckles rapping gently against the ceiling. I looked up, and then it happened. The lights flickered. Once, twice. Then darkness. The room plunged into pitch black, the kind of darkness that pressed against your skin like a weight. I stumbled, my hand flying out to find something to steady myself. The wall seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction, as though the room was growing larger and more suffocating with each passing second. I heard a sound behind me, a soft footstep, another, and then sighing. It was almost familiar, like the sound of someone breathing heavily, as if they had been running, as if they had been waiting for me. I spun around, expecting to see the woman, but there was nothing, just shadows. I couldn't see her, but I knew she was there. I could feel her. She was in the room with me, and I wasn't alone anymore. I told you, didn't I? The voice came from the corner of the room, right behind me, a whisper that slithered into my ears, colder than ice. I whipped around, but saw only the shadows. No figure, no shape. I was losing my mind. I grabbed the knife tighter, my hands slick with sweat, and backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off the empty corner. The humming had stopped, replaced now by a low guttural growl. It sounded like something that shouldn't be able to make a sound like that, like an animal or something far worse. I could feel the heat of its breath on my neck. It was close, too close. I turned quickly and bolted for the stairs. Upstairs. I have to go upstairs. The thought echoed in my mind like a chant. There was nowhere else. There was no other way. I didn't know why I felt the urge to climb toward the source of the nightmare, but it was stronger than anything else. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to escape, but my legs betrayed me, carrying me up toward the unknown. When I reached the top, I paused, catching my breath, the weight of dread making it impossible to move. The hallway stretched before me, dark and silent. The door to my room was ajar, the soft glow of moonlight spilling into the hallway. I felt it, the presence. It was there, watching me, watching. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being observed from every angle, that every step I took was being counted, every breath I made was being heard. The door creaked open further, and then the humming returned. It was faint at first, like a distant memory, but as I stood there, frozen, it grew louder, and it became clear that it wasn't just the sound of a song. It was a call, a beckoning. I stepped forward. My feet were moving without my permission, guided by something other than reason, other than fear. My legs felt as if they were made of lead, but I was unable to stop. I could hear her singing, but not with her voice. This time, the melody was coming from inside my mind. It was as though I were hearing it from the inside out, like the very rhythm of my thoughts had been altered. When I reached the door to my room, I opened it slowly. The room was as it had been before, the bed neatly made, the window closed, but something was different. The air felt thicker. I stepped inside, and that's when I saw her. In the mirror. She was standing behind me. Her face was the same, pale, almost translucent skin, dark, hollow eyes, and a smile that had no business being there. It stretched unnaturally, impossibly wide. I froze. "Let me in." The whisper wasn't in my ear. It was inside my head, and I knew, with sickening clarity, that she had already entered, and now she was inside me. The air in the room grew thick, heavy with a presence that wasn't mine. I could feel it inside me, swirling in the depths of my chest, sinking its fingers into the very core of my being. It wasn't just her anymore. It was us. She was inside my thoughts, entwined with every word, every breath, every heartbeat. I couldn't tell where I ended and she began. The reflection in the mirror was no longer just her face. It was mine, too. I saw myself staring back at me with hollow eyes, my lips stretched into that unnatural smile, mirroring hers. The sensation of her being inside me surged, and I could feel the pull of something ancient, something far older than I was, deep within the pit of my stomach. It was as if the very marrow of my bones was being slowly siphoned away, and I knew that I was no longer in control of my body. It was her now. I told you, the voice whispered again, but this time it wasn't just inside my head. It echoed around the room, coming from the walls, the floor, the air itself. It came from every corner, from everywhere. The song, the humming. It surrounded me. The mirror trembled, and the reflection twisted. Her face, our face, contorted, becoming something more. Her smile stretched wider, as if the very act of smiling was a torment, a cruel joke. I felt it deep inside me. I felt her. She was taking me. The song, once soft and distant, now filled my ears like a deafening crescendo. It was no longer a lullaby. It was a chant, a demand, a summons. Let me out. The whisper pierced through the overwhelming hum, and for a split second, I felt something. A fleeting moment of clarity. I wasn't lost. Not yet. I bolted to the door. My fingers fumbled for the knob, but the same force that had locked it earlier held it shut once again. The walls around me seemed to close in, narrowing with every breath. The air thickened further, heavy with the sound of her song. I was trapped. I heard footsteps behind me, soft but deliberate. The whispering grew louder, closer, until it was all I could hear. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to escape, but my legs wouldn't obey. I couldn't move. My mind screamed, but my body was a prisoner. The footsteps grew louder, and I turned, half expecting to see her standing there, but the space was empty. Yet I felt it. She was here. Her presence, like a cold gust of wind in the pit of my stomach, chilled me to the bone. Her gaze was piercing, even without her being there. And then I heard again the song. I'm not done. The words weren't spoken. They were felt, like they came from deep inside my own mind, but twisted, warped, manipulated. I turned back to the mirror. There, I saw it. Her reflection was no longer mine. It was all hers. Her body had taken over, consumed mine completely. The hollow, endless eyes locked with mine. She was there, in my place. I was gone. The last remnants of my self-awareness were slipping away, washed away by her voice, by her song. The chill of her presence flooded every inch of me, pushing aside the last remnants of my identity. It was as if I had never existed. I was a shell, a vessel, and the only thing that mattered now was her. And then, with a final, dreadful pull, it was over. The song reached its crescendo. The last note reverberated through the room, through the walls, the air. It wasn't a note of beauty. It was a sound of finality, a sound that ended everything. And in that final note, I was gone. The song continued to echo through the house. The last remnants of my mind were swallowed up, replaced by an endless, looping melody. Her song, my song, forever entwined in the silence that followed. It would never stop.